You've probably heard of the lost Gospels, Thomas, Judas, Mary Magdalene, books that supposedly were buried by the church to hide a different Christianity, a Christianity that was older, freer, more spiritual, and silenced. But here's what nobody teaches in those debates. The church didn't hide them. It read them carefully, line by line, and it rejected them for reasons you can still verify today in sources nearly 2,000 years old. The first witness is named Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, writing around the year 180. He had already read the book we now call the Gospel of Judas, and he wrote down in plain text exactly why the church would never accept it. And here's what makes this story strange. The church didn't destroy a single one of these books. It kept them. Let that set for a moment. The books survived because the church preserved the arguments against them. This is the real history of the Gnostic Gospels, and it is not the story you were told. To understand why the church rejected these books, you have to understand how we even have them. In December 1945, a Muhammad al-Saman named Farmer was digging for fertilizer near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. He struck something hard, a sealed earthenware jar. Inside, 13 leather-bound papyrus codices, more than 50 texts, most of them unknown to the modern world. The headlines were immediate: Secret Gospels, the buried words of Jesus. A library, the story went, hidden from the church to protect a Christianity the church had suppressed. And that framing caught fire. Books, movies, documentaries, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, the one where Judas is the hero. But here's the crucial point that gets lost. Almost none of those texts were new to the church. The Gospel of Thomas was read and quoted and rejected centuries before Nag Hammadi was ever sealed. So the question is not, what did the church hide? The question is, what did the church know, and why did it say no? Let's start with that first witness, because he matters more than almost anyone realizes. Irenaeus of Lyons wrote a 5-volume work called Against Heresies. 5 volumes! And in it, he quotes the very books we now call lost at length, sometimes word for word. Think about that. He isn't dismissing them from ignorance, he's engaging them directly. That's the opposite of suppression. Our first witness is named Irenaeus of Lyons, and his objection was not, "This is dangerous, hide it." It was, "This is not from the apostles, and we can trace why." Reason 1. These books had no apostolic lineage. The church didn't judge a text by how spiritual it sounded. It judged it by one question: can we trace this book to the men who actually saw Jesus, or to their direct students? Irenaeus put it, "The true faith," he wrote, "was handed down publicly from the apostles to the bishops in the open." The Gnostics claimed a different source, a secret tradition, whispered to a few, unknown to everyone else. And that's the split in one sentence. One group says, "We received this openly and you can check." The other says, "We received this secretly and you can't." Which one sounds like it came from a faith that preached in public squares? Now, here's the crucial point that often gets lost. The church didn't reject the Gnostic Gospels because they were inconvenient. It rejected them by applying 2 tests that are still on the record. Test 1, origin. Was it written by an apostle or eyewitness, Matthew, John, Peter, or by a direct companion like Mark or Luke? The Gnostic Gospels fail this test in a very specific way. They claim to be by apostles. The Gospel of Thomas says it's the secret sayings of Thomas. The Gospel of Mary claims Mary Magdalene. But the church could ask a question these books couldn't survive. Who handed this to you? Name the chain. If a book appeared in 150 AD claiming to be from Thomas, who died a century earlier, someone had to say where they got it. The Gnostics couldn't. And that wasn't a technicality, it was the entire question. Test 2. The content itself. This is where it gets harder for the modern reader, because it's the part the documentaries always skip. The Gnostic Gospels weren't just different, they taught that the material world was a prison created by a lesser, ignorant God, and that Jesus, the divine Christ, never truly took on flesh, never really suffered, never actually bled. That's not a small disagreement. That's the opposite of the faith the apostles died for. And honestly, that's not an unfair place for a skeptic to pause. If you're watching this and you think, maybe the Gnostics had the more spiritual reading, that's a legitimate position, but understand what it costs. The gospel the church kept is the one where God becomes flesh and dies in public. The Gnostic one is where he only appears to. The church chose the harder, more embodied, more verifiable story. That choice tells you what it actually cared about. Now we come to the part that gets quoted out of context more than any other, the closing of the canon. The narrative you hear is that a small group of powerful bishops got together and voted, and the losers were burned. That is not what happened. The earliest known canon list is the Muratorian Fragment, from around 170 to 200 AD. It lists the books the churches of Rome were reading, and here's the part nobody mentions. It already rejects the Gnostic texts, and it says so on the page. These cannot be received into the Catholic Church, it says, for gall cannot be mixed with honey. So the rejection isn't a 4th century power grab, it's a 2nd century consensus. The decision was made long before Constantine was born. Then, in 367 AD, Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, writes his 39th Festal Letter, and he lists the exact 27 books of the New Testament, the same 27 you hold in your hands today. Here's the detail that completely refutes the conspiracy story. Athanasius doesn't invent that list. He says in the letter itself that these are the books handed down by the fathers. He's recording what the church has already accepted. The councils of Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397 simply ratified it. No single council banned the Gnostic Gospels. The canon was the result of a long, public, verifiable process, not its starting point. If this journey into our shared past is meaningful to you and you want to keep exploring the roots of the faith, I'd like to invite you to subscribe. We do this work slowly and carefully here, and there's a lot more coming. And now I want to reframe the entire question, because this is where everything shifts. We have been asking, what did the church hide and why? But that is the wrong question. The right question is, how did the church, without a printing press, without a central authority, without even a complete New Testament for its first 3 centuries, know which books were its own? How could a church in Rome, a church in Alexandria, and a church in Antioch, separated by thousands of miles, arrive at the same list of 27 books? They weren't copying each other. They weren't obeying a single bishop. They were all answering the same 2 tests. Is it from the apostles? And was it preached openly? The Gnostic Gospels failed both, not because they were banned, because they couldn't pass. Here is the Catholic position, stated plainly, and it's more honest than the conspiracy version you've been handed. The Church does not fear these books. It has never needed to hide them. It preserved the arguments against them in Irenaeus, in the Muratorian Fragment, in Athanasius, for anyone to read today. The reason the Gnostic Gospels are lost is not that they were suppressed, it's that the Church judged them over centuries in the open and found them wanting. Let that sit for a moment. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary, you can read every one of them today, in full, translated, on a device in your pocket. They were never destroyed. They were never hidden. They were simply not received. And there's a world of difference between those two things. The next time someone tells you the church buried the real story of Jesus, remember what you now know. It read those books first, it named its reasons, and it wrote them down nearly 2,000 years ago so that you could check the evidence yourself. So here's my question to you. Now that you know the church didn't hide the Gnostic Gospels, it read them, tested them, and rejected them in writing, does this change how you view the so-called lost Gospels? Or do you still think the secret tradition was the real one? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I genuinely like to know what you think. And subscribe now, because next we're going to look at something even more provocative. If you thought the Gnostic Gospels were the controversy, wait until you see how a pope became a prisoner in his own building and turned it into the smallest nation on earth. Next, why Vatican City is a country and the 59-year standoff that made it one.